Around 140 BC, Antipater of Sidon wrote about a mysterious Colossus of Helios in his poem on the seven wonders of the ancient world. For over 2,000 years, the statue has loomed over our imagination. A titan lost to time, leaving behind only questions. Where did it stand? Why is the image as we know it medieval fake news? And what did the statue really look like? Combining modern technology and descriptions in ancient Greek texts, we try to answer these questions. Follow along while we reconstruct the Colossus of Helios, better known as the Colossus of Rhodes. We are in Rhodes, a modern and lively city that attracts hundreds of thousands of tourists, especially in summer. The story of the large statue absent here begins when around the year 295 BC, after a year of siege of the city of Rhodes, the Macedonian nobleman Demetrius retreats head over heels, probably because Rhodes' Egyptian ally Ptolemy sent reinforcements to help them out. In their haste, the fleeing soldiers left behind several war machines, which were dismantled by the Rhodians and sold for 300 talents. In these narrow streets, where other life-or-death battles are now fought, great victory celebrations were held, and the islanders soon decided that a monument to commemorate the victory should be erected with the captured money. The renowned sculptor Chares from the nearby town of Lindos was given the honor of creating what would become the largest bronze statue of classical antiquity. Neither he nor the Rhodians would have suspected that he was thus starting a project that would still be world famous more than 2,000 years later and attract lots of tourists to the island. It would take him and his team about 12 years to create an enormous statue of the patron of the island of Rhodes, the sun god Helios. From around 283 BC onwards, their impressive work was finished, and the Colossus looked out over the sea and the land of the Rhodians. Chares' superhuman feat made him, his statue, and the island of Rhodes instantly famous as poets, geographers, historians, and travelers spread their stories about the wonder of the world all around the Mediterranean. Everything we now know about the Colossus comes from these classical sources. The Greek geographer Strabo described the statue as at least 70 cubits high, which is about 32 to 34 modern meters, although the precise length of this ancient Greek measure is debated. You can understand what an immense achievement the sculptors have accomplished when you know that the other famous statue with the sun god of Helios as example, the Statue of Liberty, is 46 meters high and still took 9 years to build, using much more modern techniques. We also know from Philo of Byzantium that the majestic statue stood on a white marble pedestal, likely making the statue somewhere between 36 and 45 meters high in total. But before we delve into some of the less certain things, we unfortunately have to share 2 more less rosy facts about the world's most famous statue besides the Statue of Liberty. The first is that Chares' Colossus did not last long because it already collapsed during an earthquake that hit Rhodes, somewhere between 226 and 228 before Christ. The fragments that were probably scattered around the statue that had broken off around the knees were impressive according to the Roman historian Pliny.
Few men can get their arms round the thumb of the statue, and the fingers are larger than those of most statues.
But although it will probably surprise you that this true work of art just stood for little more than 50 years, an even more shocking fact is that the Colossus in reality totally did not look like its popular image we all know. And to surprise you even more, it was not even located here at the docks. Yes, you heard that right. There is no way the Colossus looked like its famous picture, towering proudly above the harbor with a torch in its hand. The current popular image of the statue is based on a 14th century myth, which was then painted in 1535 by Martin van Heemskerk in his painting, Wonders of the Ancient World, which depicts the Colossus straddling the harbor. It turned out to be an appealing image that went viral in the following centuries like a modern TikTok post, because it was wrongly copied everywhere. It is remarkable, however, that the myth has survived for so long in popular culture, because already in the 19th century, a lot of scholars theorized about more logical locations for the statue. What the Colossus actually looked like and where it stood has been a matter of debate among scientists for centuries, because no physical traces have been left behind. While we searched for it in the back streets of Rhodes, we discovered that even not all written ancient sources describing it have turned out to be reliable. The most important facts come from the work Natural History by the aforementioned Pliny the Elder, but also he incorrectly states that the statue stood for 66 years, while we now know it can't have been more than 58 years. A very logical explanation for the fact that even one of the oldest works describing the Colossus was wrong is that Pliny lived no less than 300 years after the statue collapsed, and his book dates from 77 AD. We also mentioned Philo earlier as a source, but this author is often misidentified as the engineer Philo, who lived around the 3rd century BC, while the author who wrote about the Colossus probably lived between the 4th and 6th centuries AD. So none of them can have seen the Colossus themselves. But by combining the knowledge from the texts of Pliny, Strabo, and Philo about the Colossus with modern science, we can gain more insight into the possible appearance and location of the legendary statue. Thus, knowing that the statue was made of enormous amounts of bronze also gives us other important information about what it may have looked like. Because every material has physical limitations, the sculptor and archaeologist Herbert Maryon of the British Museum was able to conclude with this knowledge as early as 1956.
A statue of this length could not have remained stable in this position, using the techniques that existed in classical antiquity.
Legs that formed a wide gateway to the harbor would simply have been too unstable. At that time, these kinds of bronze statues of gods were made much more often, and they were also called colossi. So it is almost certain that the largest colossus the Rhodians ever built, of their patron St. Helios, must have had a safe and stable pose. Combined with the fact that sources wrote that the bronze statue was stabilized from the inside by a metal frame, sculptor Maryon reconstructed the statue in this pose with one foot in front of the other for stabilization. The pose resembles the oldest depiction that archaeologist Badoud has been able to find of what is probably the Colossus, which dates from the second half of the 11th century and is kept in the Patriarchal Library in Jerusalem. Now that we have a better understanding of what the Colossus must have looked like, You would of course also like to know more about where the statue stood. You might think a short Google search gives you the answer, but science is quite convinced that the alleged location of the Colossus in maps, in the foundations of what is now the fort of St. Nicholas, also is unlikely. Contrary to 19th century theories, a strong indication that the harbor was never the location of the statue is that until the 14th century, there is no source that speaks about the harbor or a colossus with spread legs. Historian Robert Kebrick added in 2019 that the Egyptian engineers who advised Chares were not crazy and undoubtedly took weather conditions into account before building such an expensive and imposing statue. Earthquakes cannot be prevented, but building on higher ground does protect the statue from tidal waves. And also remember that a statue like the Statue of Liberty is struck by lightning about 600 times a year. Building a bronze statue so close to the water would simply guarantee that things would go wrong immediately. The fort of St. Nicholas is in fact the basis of the medieval myth because not a historian, but solicitor Nicola de Martoni wrote in his journal that he heard a story that the Colossus stood here with one foot, and with the other on the mole foot of the mills that were once also on the other side. A modern reconstruction of such a statue in footage from Microsoft Flight Simulator immediately shows how absurd this story was, because it would have made the Colossus reach into the clouds and give it a bizarre height. And the classical sources are clear. Philo described the Colossus as being surrounded by land, which fits in perfectly with sculptor Maryon's assertion that with ancient Greek building techniques and cranes, it must have been impossible to build such a tall statue near water. A possible more logical location can be found just outside the current old city walls, because well hidden in a beautiful park, away from most tourists, is in fact the Acropolis of the classical city of Rhodes. Here you can seek refuge in search of peace or a bit of coolness, and you will find a stadium and the remains of various sacred temples dedicated to, among others, the Greek gods Apollo, Athena, and Zeus. But there may be more to be found here. In a less scientific article, historian Robert Kebrick defends an old theory. According to him, here, at the highest point of the Acropolis, which is now called Mount Smith, we are standing at the spot where the mighty Colossus once stood. The top is far from the city, so that lightning or collapse is no longer a danger, and it makes the statue visible to all incoming ships in a wide area, which makes the holy mountain a logical place for the proud of the Rhodians. On the holy mountain near temples for other gods seems a logical place for the proud of the wealthy Rhodian Republic. The caves of the nymph here in the ground could have been dedicated to the nymph Perse, who was the wife of Helios in Greek mythology, with the statue of her husband next to her sanctuary. Do you agree with Kebrick that here, on this 90-meter-high rock formation, at the only place on the island where you can see the sun from sunrise to sunset, the approximately 45-meter-high statue of the sun god Helios towered above the mortal Rhodians? Even though Helios was important for Rhodes, expert Nathan Badoud argues that the mountain is nevertheless unlikely because in Greek culture, the best spot on the mountain could only have been reserved for higher gods as Apollo, Athena, and Zeus. So where is the most logical place according to the latest studies? Badoud argues that already around 1900, the German Henrik van Gelder suggested that the current site of the Grand Master's Palace probably once housed a shrine in honor of Helios, and recent researchers have confirmed this long-forgotten theory. The theory is supported by the best source from antiquity that we have not yet mentioned. It's the histories of the Greek historian Polybius, who wrote his work around 150 BC, when the Colossus had only just collapsed, and maybe based his texts on people who had actually witnessed the earthquake. Polybius literally wrote about the Rhodians.
The earthquake, which had occurred a short time previously, and which had cast down their great Colossus and most of the walls and arsenals.
If the statue had collapsed from the cliffs where the castle now stands, it would indeed have destroyed lower houses, workshops, and parts of the city wall. Could this then be the place where the most famous statue from classical antiquity once stood? We simply don't know, but recent developments show that science can once hopefully surprise us with facts that we are not even aware of yet. Until then, we recommend that you visit the beautiful city of Rhodes, the Acropolis, and the Grand Master's Palace yourself in the quiet early or late season, and let your imagination run wild as you wander through history while enjoying a well-deserved holiday. And perhaps it will be you who, on a quiet late summer afternoon, will have an inspiration and solve one of the great mysteries of classical antiquity. Until then, there's only one thing left to say. Thanks for watching, and see you again in one of our next videos.